Hello everyone, I know I promised last video that what we would be creating the projectiles and firing them in this video, but before that I thought it would be really interesting to first add some HUD to our player. So what we're going to do in this tutorial of the Unreal Engine 5 FPS series is add a crosshair and then some sort of ammunition counter, both for the current ammunition and then for the total ammunition. We won't use these or connect them to anything just yet, at least not anything functioning, but we will do that later on in the tutorial, at least for the ammunition. So let's just begin. The first step for us in this case is going to be figuring out how you add UI to the player's screen. Now, in Unreal Engine 5 and 4, I guess, the way to add UI to the player's screen is with widgets. Now, widgets are basically a type of blueprint that allows you to add a lot of basic UI elements and then spawn them on the screen of the player. So let's create one of those. If I go to core and then right click, I can search for it's either going to be in blueprint. It's not going to be in blueprint. It's going to be in, we're going to have some sort of user interface category right here, user interface, and then we're going to see widget blueprint. Under widget blueprint, you can ignore any of the all classes thing here and just click on user widget. I'm going to call this one WBP, which is widget blueprint, and then call it UI or player UI. And then open it. I'm going to drag it right there. Now you're going to see that we have a very empty canvas. This does look different from the blueprint, from the normal blueprint widget or the normal blueprint UI that we see. What we're going to do in here is I'm first going to look around and see what everything is. First thing I see here is the hierarchy, which seems to be empty. This is the blueprint we created. It has a lot of settings, which we're not going to go through for now, as this is not a tutorial explaining all the intricacies of widget blueprints, but we might make one of those if you're interested. I can also see a palette. Now, in the palette, what I'm going to do to create my ammunition text and my crosshair is I'm first going to type canvas panel. Now, if I hover over it, it's going to tell us that it's a designer-friendly panel that allows widgets to be laid out at arbitrary locations. We need this as the root of our widget so we can place more than one widget or more than one UI element inside it, basically. So I'm just going to drag that in here, and it's going to give us a canvas. This is going to match the screen size all the time. That's also partly why we're adding a canvas, although it might not look it right now, but whenever we do spawn it, it will do that. I'm going to click on close there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find this text element. You can search for it or just go to common text. And I'm going to drag one of these in here. You can see that we have a text block now. What I'm going to do with this text block is actually a few things. First, I'm going to go to its details panel. And inside of anchors, which is this thing right here, this is basically where or what part of the canvas is going to pull the text whenever we stretch the screen. So if you make the screen bigger or smaller than what you're looking at in the preview. So for example, if I did this and I looked at different sizes, depending on the actual anchor of it, it would be stretched in a direction or another. So at the moment, we're just kind of placing it in the top left corner, but I'm not going to place the ammunition text in there. I'm going to place the ammunition text at the bottom left, so I can click on anchors and then hit the bottom left one. That's not going to place it directly, but if I stretch, you're going to see that it does get pulled in with that. It looks a lot weirder now. Instead of that, what I'm going to do, and first I am going to make the screen a little bit larger just so we can see it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the position and reset that, and that's going to set it directly to the bottom left. Then for alignment, which is kind of the pivot point of this text, that's currently set at 0, 0, and that's the top left corner. That's why with position 0, we are at the bottom left like this. If I set this to 0.5, you're going to see that it actually moves it. I'm not going to change that one, though. I'm going to change this one to 1, just so the pivot starts right here, and our text is on the canvas at 0. And then I'm going to move position X to 100, and move position Y to 100, or sorry, negative 100. And this is kind of going to be our ammunition position. And for now, I'm just going to type 30 in here. Let's just use 30. Now, you'll see that we have some sort of size here that we don't really want. This might break things. We can just click size to content, and that will always match the size of whatever text we add. So that's going to be really good. We're not really going to use that, though, but just as a tip. Then I'm going to duplicate this one. And I'm actually, don't duplicate with Control D, just Control C, Control V. And it's still placed it in the corner. Okay. Well, just ignore me then. Just go 100 and minus 100 again. And then instead of 100, let's go 120 or 140, maybe. And between these two, I'm going to place another text. And that's just going to be kind of a slash. And place this one at 100, minus 100. And then let's move it around a little bit. Like this should be fine. And then let's move the other text a little bit. And this is going to be our ammunition text. I'm going to keep it very simple. Now, this is all parented to the bottom left. So if I move the size of the screen, it's always going to stay kind of relative to the bottom left in the same position. Now, we're going to need to add a crosshair. To add a crosshair, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, let's just test how we would go about adding a crosshair. Usually what I do is I place images and just sort of use these to get a crosshair, really. So I'm going to place an image just in the center. So let's just center it. If you zero it out, actually, you'll see it's in the top left corner. So I'm going to set its anchor to the center and then reset its position. Then, since it's still not centered, I'm going to make sure that I set its alignment to 0.5, 0.5. And now you're going to see that it is centered. Now for this one, we are going to mess around with the size. So let's say this one is going to be the top of the crosshair. We're going to make 4 little lines. The top of the crosshair is going to be, let's say, size X 5, and then size Y, we're going to make it 10, for example. Might make it a little more than that, actually, like 15 or 20, maybe. And then we're going to move it up by 10, or down by, move it down by 20, let's say. Great, now we have the top part of the crosshair. We can now create, or Control C, Control V, and we can create the bottom part of the crosshair. Again, let's just reset this position. For some reason, it moved it. And I'm going to do the exact same thing we did before, but just reverse. So it's going to be 20 on the Y. So that will give us the same kind of spacing. If you look at it. Then I'm going to duplicate again. And I'm going to position this one completely reversed. So it's going to not be positioned Y20. It's going to be positioned X20. And then we're going to change the sizes around. So it's going to be 20 and 5. Great. Now we have the right one. Let's name it that. I'm doing F2 and then naming it, by the way. You could also name it right here. Now let's duplicate this one yet again and then type left and then make sure it's centered and 20 or negative 20. And now we have a crosshair. It is a bit thick, but you can change the sizes of these by just modifying the size property right here. So it's not very hard to change. With that, now we have our widget. Now we need to spawn it on the player's screen because by default, this isn't going to show up. This is not magical. We still need to spawn it. It is very easy to spawn it though. Let's go to the character blueprint, which you can find in FPS tutorial core. And then the character blueprint is naturally BP character. Inside here, I'm going to scroll up in the My Blueprint panel, go to the event graph, and inside of that, I'm going to double click on begin play. This is where we're going to do all of the spawning magic. Now, there's a lot of like inventory related stuff here. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of this. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to click collapse the function. This will create a function for us that we can just call. It's kind of similar to an event. It's really just for now. All you need to know is that it's a way to encapsulate all of that code. And we're going to call this begin inventory or spawn inventory. And that will make it really neat for us to modify later. If I double click on it, by the way, you can see that the exact same code we were doing before is getting called inside of here, and the same thing will get run. Now, after this spawn inventory, what I will do is I will call a create widget action, which will allow us to construct or create a widget. It's going to ask us for a class. The class itself is naturally the WBP player UI, which you can select right here. And then the owning player, it says the player that owns the widget, and it's asking for a player controller object reference. Now, that just means we need to get player controller, which is going to return this character's player controller. With that, we've created the widget, but we still have to add it to this specific player's screen. The reason why we need to do this is because sometimes a game may have more than one player locally, and you may want to add certain UI elements only to a certain player's screen. So we need to add it specifically to this player screen. So to do that, we just go add to viewport. You can also, I believe, go add to player screen, but add to viewport will work fine. With that, let's comment this. I'm pressing C, create UI. Let's compile and save. Then go in here, and you can see that we have a crosshair and the ammunition text, both of them on the screen. One last thing I'm going to do, and I think this isn't necessarily creating the widget, but I am going to connect these two values right here to some values on the character. We'll use this later whenever we actually have ammunition, but I am going to leave that set up already. So first we're going to create those values. So I'm going to go to the character blueprint, and inside of variables, I'm going to create a current ammunition value. This value is going to be an integer, so that's a number. And then I'm going to duplicate this and say total ammunition. We'll use these probably just next tutorial whenever we fire the weapon. With them being created, I'm going to compile and just set them to a value. For now, 30 will do. And make them editable. You can do that from the instance editable variable right here, or just clicking on the I right here. That will allow us to edit it in class defaults properly. And now I'm going to go to the widget blueprint, and this is going to work very similarly to our animation blueprint from before. So the thing we're doing before is kind of getting the character and then getting information from it. We're going to do something very similar here. In construct, I believe is the node we want to do this in. We're going to do get player pawn, which it says returns the pawn for the player controller. I actually believe there is a get owning. Yes, get owning player pawn will return the specific pawn or character in our case that owns this widget. So let's call that. And then from here, we're going to cast it just like we did in the animation blueprint to our current or to our actual type, that being character. I'm going to right click and promote this to a variable, call it character, just so we can use it easier. And then I'm going to grab the character and I'm going to take the ammunition. You're going to see that if I search for get current ammunition, that is a variable, which is great for us. I'm not going to set it from there though. The place where I am going to set it from is in the designer panel, which is right here. I switched to graph, by the way, in case you didn't see that very quickly. I didn't notice. I'm going to go to the text right here. Let's rename this very quickly. I'm going to call this current ammo. And then the next one is going to be total ammo. If you click on current ammo and go to content text, this is where we change the text, so I can add any text here. We will click on bind right here. And you could click character and then current ammunition, and that would always update it to the character ammunition. But one issue you might have is that sometimes this can lead to errors. So instead of that, and I went ahead of myself there, instead of that, we are not going to do that. We will click create binding, and this will create a function just like the one we created before. If I look at functions, called get current ammo text, which will ask us to return a text value. So if I type some random text in here and then compile, you won't see it right now, but if I play, you will see that it has that random text. So let's go back to the graph. Instead of that, what we do want to do is we want to get the character and get current ammunition. And then if I plug this in, it's going to auto convert it to text. This might still lead to issues because we're getting the character. You have to take this into account. This can sometimes run before we get the character. So before this part of the code runs, sorry, if I go back to the event graph right here, it can run before this construct. And thus our character reference here, our variable, is going to be empty. So it's going to try to get a value from something that doesn't exist. That can lead to an issue. So before we get the value, we're going to drag the character and then drag from it a isValid node. And this will determine, this action will determine if this object is valid, as in it actually contains something, this variable, and we're not trying to destroy it. So this is going to be really helpful. So just put that in isValid, and let's use it just like that. Great, now compile. And if I go to character, just because in the widget, we already have 30 by default, so I'm going to change the number, the current ammunition in the character to something else, like 45, just so we can see the change. Again, if I go back to the widget, you can see it doesn't update just yet because there is no character reference, and also this does not run in the editor. But if I go back to the map, you can see that we do get 45, which is great. That's just what we wanted. Well, let's go back to our widget and do exactly the same thing with the total ammo. So we can bind that, create binding. I'm going to go to get current ammo text really and just copy this. And then go back to get total ammo text, paste it. Only change I'm going to make is change current ammunition here for total ammunition. And then compile and save. Great. Now we have both the current and the total ammunition in there. The only thing that's left for us to do in this tutorial is going to be hide the crosshair whenever we aim. That's usually something most games do, so let's do it here too. This is going to be very easy. We're going to go to designer, and inside of here, we can actually search for a panel. I'm going to parent all of these elements to one element, and we're only going to hide that one when we aim. This is just going to make it easier. You could hide all of these one by one, but instead of that, I'm going to just parent them. Now, actually, it's not a panel that I'm looking for. Specifically, what I'm looking for, let's see, is, I suppose we could just use an image. Let's just use an image. Or I'm not sure if an image can hold more than one item, actually. Okay, actually, scratch that. Let's just, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide these. I'm not exactly sure, but you can put all of these into one thing. As a matter of fact, I think I can just put them in a canvas panel, and that would be totally fine. Let's try that too. So just, if I make that big and then stretch it, and then I drag all of these inside of that, it will not result in an issue, which is great. And then the position is also going to be correct, I believe, because the canvas panel is correct. Yes. You would be correct. 0.5, 0.5. The size should not matter. And then everything is going to be centered. Great. Now let's use this canvas panel. If I click on it, you're going to see that inside of its properties, there's going to be certain settings that we can mess around with. One of them is going to be render opacity right down here. If I scroll this down, you can see that we can hide the crosshair itself. So this is what we're going to use to really just hide the crosshair. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to go to the graph. I'm going to go to the event graph right here. And inside of tick, I'm going to do this in tick, though this is not the greatest way to do this. Inside of tick, I'm going to get the character, right click, get a character, and then get aiming, or aiming. Do we not have an aiming value? We should have an aiming value. Let's see, what is our aiming value called? It's B aiming, so let's just make sure we type B aiming. Why is that not returning B aiming? There it is, aiming. So we can get aiming, and with aiming, we can basically check whether we're aiming or not and set the crosshair's value to one thing or another. So let's plug that into the tick event. And then we don't have a variable for the canvas panel that we're using for the crosshair. So let's go here. Let's rename this crosshair. And then at the top right, it's going to say is variable. So just click that, go back to the event graph, and then inside of here, you're going to see crosshair. So I can drag this one, and then we were changing the render opacity. So set render opacity. There's a function for this, so we can just drag that in. And then basically what we can do is if we're aiming, we can set the render opacity to 0. And then if we are not aiming, we can just set it back to 1. And then go back. If I click, it's going to hide and show. Now you could, as always, smooth the interpolation of that render opacity value. I'm not going to do that in this tutorial because it's already running quite a lot longer than I expected this one to run. So we'll just leave it at that. And I'll come back next tutorial where we'll do a lot of the shooting and maybe also add some smoothing to the crosshair, or maybe not. You know, you never know. It's a bit of a surprise for me too. It's going to be interesting. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Have a fun day.